What is up, YouTube? This is Crow from Team Triple Sleeve again with another video. This time around, I'm actually at my locals today, Super Games. We had just opened up recently, and we had about 20 players today. Again, we have a familiar face. One of our top 4 participants. You got which place again?
First.
Yeah, no, at the Crow's Nest.
The Crow's Nest. Third place.
Third place. We obviously, well, you got first today, but yeah. So he got third place at the last Crow's Nest that we have. He was the one piloting Barrow Magnus. Again, phenomenal player. Can't say that enough. Today, brought something else to the table today. The deck that he actually wanted to use. I'm gonna go ahead and let you tell us what deck you used today.
Today I use HEXAORB, which is my favorite deck by far in the game right now. I wanted to put it last weekend, but it got left at home, so I had to play Barrow Magnus. And Barrow Magnus is great. I think Barrow Magnus is a really good deck. I had the least amount of games on it compared to every other deck that I play tested. I had a good list, but I just had the least amount of games on it, so I didn't know every matchup. HEXAORB, I know all the matchups for the most part. I had the most experience, like many games with HEXAORB, and I think that is a really powerful deck. Really powerful.
And I can say this myself, I have tested his list, and it definitely is some sauce. A lot of people say that HEXAORB kind of sucks, or it's like the second worst deck next to Eugene. How do you feel about that statement?
I think that HEXAORB is top 2. I think
that's a bold statement.
It is a bold statement, but I'm just gonna be real. Like, I don't have to hide it. There's not like really big events coming on right now. I'm just not gonna hide it. Like, HEXAORB is the deck to play, and Bastion is also one of the decks to play. You can put them 1A, 1B really, and then Bruce is like right behind that.
Keter Sanctuary Supremacy. That's what it is.
Keter Sanctuary right now is the supreme area. You're going to see a lot of Bastions everywhere, so you got to be prepared to play against it. I think HEXAORB gives you a really good shot to play against Bastion.
Right, and then the deck is just very popular as well as far as Bastion goes. Again, you don't see anybody really playing HEXAORB because people think, oh, you just have to superior ride, and then you don't really plus because you have to put a card from the top of your, from your hand on the top of your deck. It's not a plus. It's more of just a break even, but it's the fact it's the pressure that is that.
It leads to situations in which you plus. It's not a direct card to your hand, but it does lead to situations in which you plus.
Got you. All right, man. And again, my man's right here. He ended up getting first place out of 20 participants. Me and him played, and in final standings, he pretty much got first. And when we played, great match nonetheless. It was just play testing scenarios and stuff. Yeah, I won that one, but again, games can be totally different when you're actually sitting in more of a tournament setting rather than a casual setting. Yeah. So there's no telling how that game might have went. But man, without further ado, we keep holding up and holding the process. Let's get into this deck, my man. Go ahead and show me the sauce that you got in this deck.
All right, like I said, I play HEXAORB today, as you guys can see. I'll start off with the triggers.
Small glare on this one. Move it to the side some.
4 heals. I run 2 and 2 just because I like alternate artwork, and like every way to throw your opponent off is like, in my opinion, always advantage. So they may think you're running, you know, X amount of heals, or they may see one, and it's like weird like ratio stuff or whatever. But I also just like both arts.
I can definitely agree with you there, because when I play tested your deck and I was playing my girlfriend, she was like, all I seen was draw triggers. Do you run any other triggers? Because she kept saying this one and this one. Yeah. And then when she got hit with like the front, she was like, let you run fronts?
Yeah, so I got...
If you're selling any more cards, you have 15 minutes left. Otherwise, you're not selling them today.
So it's like two of this draw, 1 of this draw, so 3 draws total. 4 of you, 1 to include the over trigger. 3 fronts. I'll explain why you run fronts in this deck. A lot of HEXAORB players do not run fronts. I'll explain why. I run one of this one, 2 of this one, and 5 crits. You don't have to go more than 5 crits. You can even run 4 crits. The trigger lineup is a little malleable because you can run an extra draw, you can run an extra front, you can run less crits than actually this, and I'll explain why this deck doesn't rely on crits as much as people may perceive it to. Here's my over trigger. I run an over trigger. When it comes to my grade 1 lineup, 4 of the countercharger, Soul Blast 2 countercharge. It is really probably one of the most, it's probably the most important grade 1 in the entire deck. Soul Blast 2 and Countercharge, this deck is really deadly with Counter Blast, so every time you can flip a damage up and use it again, it's very, very valuable. A lot of people only run 2 of this. 4, you have to see it, you want to see it, you want to see as many as possible, as quick as possible, even as quick as turn 2, you want to have this card in your first hand actually, because your turn 2 player, you're going to Counter Blast for your Riot Chain, draw a card, you want to be able to have a chance to unflip that damage as soon as possible. 4 of Tartine, who Soul Blast 1 checks top 2 and rests herself when on plays. She's really good turn 2. She's good turn 3. She's good at every phase in the game. Well, she's good turn 3. I'll explain why, but most of the time you won't use her turn 3 when you check top 3 when you ride your HEXAORB. And, of course, 4 PGs. For grade 2s, I run 3 extra of the ride chain grade 2 that checks top 1. I had the 1 in the ride deck, which is like standard, and then the 3 extra. I ran a little bit of a variant with my deck today because I normally only run 2 of her, but I've also been playtesting for the next set as well. So 3 is perfectly fine for right now. It'll pretty much serve the same purpose in the next set when the new cards come out, and you'll just be replacing it with cards that do the exact same thing. As far as grade 3s go, 4 HEXAORBs, 1 in the ride deck, standard, you have to run it. 4 of Refluke, who soul charge himself for 10k. Soul is very important in HEXAORB, very, very vital resource in HEXAORB because you're a counter charger. So like your soul gives you counter charge, your counter charge gives you more counter blast, your counter blast wins you games. So for Refluke, he will be, you'll maybe be able to take 1 out when the new cards come out, because there's other cards that do like somewhat similar things as far as the deck goes. He gives you a soul, he gives you a 10k column to your column, so he's really like soul charge 1 gives something 10k, which is really, really good.
And even though you're playtesting too, I realized that just he's pretty much a staple. It was like I tried taking out like 2 of them. I was like, no, this card's just way too busted, especially when you pairing it with this card here. That card's bonkers.
Yeah, so Refluke, yeah, you get the soul charge, you get the 10k. He may be a card out of your hand when you call it to the field, but once you give that 10k to something, that's a card out of your opponent's hand, so that's literally a card for a card. And sometimes it can lead to plus scenarios if you have a restander, which is prime example here. Divine Sister, whatever her name is, I don't know her name, but she counterblasts 2 to restand when you check a trigger and gives herself 5k. Lepisto, yeah. So Refluke can put itself in the soul. You can give 10k to her. You can give 10k to your Fasado. Either or. If you know you're going to restand her, like if you check top because it triggers, you're always checking the top of your deck, or you put a card on top because of HEXAORB, you're going to be able to restand her, so you can give the power to her. And then maybe give her a 5k from this order over here, which I'll explain in a second, or you can boost her, and she'll swing for magic numbers. She'll swing for more than 15. You'll counterblast 2, you'll restand her, she'll get that, and then she'll get the 5k. So she automatically is, another 15k shield if your opponent doesn't hit a trigger. And if you hit a trigger, you're probably putting 10k on her anyway, so that'll be another set of shield out of your opponent's hand. 2 Fasado. My original list, I run 3. We only had 2 SPs, so I just run the 2, and I just run 1 extra of this grade 2 instead of just the extra Fasado. Doesn't come up a lot. Fasado is just pressure. The best part about Fasado that no one talks about is your opponent's going to guard this every time, but they also want to hit it, so they're going to commit resources to killing it. So Fasado is actually more than 10k shield because your opponent is going to attack this. So it's actually a grade 3 that doesn't directly have shield value, but because your opponent, your opponent is going to attack and target this, especially if they're not playing a retire deck, it's just you throw it down whenever you get it. It's going to bait out and attack. Your opponent's going to hit it. 3 of the draw 2 order. Have to run 3 of this. Maybe in the future you can cut it down to 2, and when certain other cards come out. You mainly want to get through your card. You want to get to other pieces. You want to get your units. You want to get to your HEXAORBs. Those are like the biggest things. I run so many counter charges that the counter blast doesn't really affect me as much. It's not a big cost, and plus it gives the extra 5k, which is just so good, and like the sweetest icing on the cake is it giving a 5k and drawing 2 cards. Sometimes I like to use my abilities to stack and see what I'm going to draw. Sometimes in certain scenarios you'll just play it and draw 2 instead. And of course,
I got a question for you, because I know this card burns 2 counterblasts. This card also burns 2 counterblasts as well. Granted, I understand you do have a countercharger within Fasado and Basita. I can't remember actually pronounce her name.
The grade 1 that countercharges.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Have you ever ran into an issue with counterblasts or managing counterblasts, especially because she only countercharges 1, and like you said earlier, Fasado normally doesn't hit for real. So when you have both of those in your hand, do you which do you choose? Do you ever run resources?
Scenarios. There are many scenarios that you can run into. One of the most common scenarios is also checking how much damage your opponent has. If your opponent is at a percentage of damage, and because also you're gonna typically know if you're gonna be when you first ride the HEXAORB, you're gonna stack your top 3 cards. You're gonna know what's there. Right. So you know how to set up. You want to know. If you want to draw 2 of 2 normal units, and you put a trigger on the bottom. So maybe 2 normal units on top and a trigger on the bottom, and you'll draw 2. And then you'll get that trigger, or if you don't want to draw on that turn, and if you want to just call this unit and get the restand, it's going to be dependent on your opponent's damage. If your opponent's sitting at low damage, you don't really necessarily have to damage them that much. You may have a crit on top, you never know, but you never really have to damage your opponent that much at that point unless you're playing certain decks. It's all playtest matchups. That's the biggest thing I can stress is playtest matchups.
So what would you say the kill range is for this deck? For example, I think with Bastion, that normally 3 damage. Normally you end up killing your opponent, especially if they only have like a sick card hand, because they can't normally block like 40 columns and 35 columns and so on and so forth. So what would you say the difference is for this deck?
The kill range for this deck, there's 2 scenarios. Two scenarios. How much damage you have and what turn you are on. If you are at 4 damage and you have 2 of this in your hand, the kill range is 2 damage.
Really?
If you're at 4 damage, you have 4 counterblasts, or a way to get another counterblast unflipped. Like if you have multiple soul cards, let's say you soul charge from a fluke, you have multiple soul, only have 2 of this on the board, you can counter charge to. You can actually kill someone from 2 damage. I've done it multiple times. But if you don't have that scenario, sometimes you're only at 3 damage. Sometimes your opponent doesn't commit a board and attack you and hit a lot of, hit a crit or something.
And it's just
rush you.
Persona Ride or pre-Persona Ride?
That's just straight up grade 3, stack your top 3. On
Gotcha.
Persona Ride with the crit, like its kill range can be with the over trigger. Kill range is obviously 1 damage.
Right.
Without the over trigger, let's say you just Persona Ride and stack a crit on top. But if you know the other 2 cards, if there's another trigger or 2, if there's 2 triggers there, kill range once again 1. It can actually be 1 damage, especially if you, like I said, you stack another card and there's another crit trigger there. Without those instances, if there's only 1 crit, kill range Persona Ride turn, or without 4 damage on Persona Ride turn, kill range is 3 damage. But if you do have 4 counterblast and 2 of this unit, kill range is 2 damage. It's all depending on how much damage you have. If your opponent wants to rush this deck and give it counterblast, you're gonna eat them alive. Like it's worse. Like some people want to like deprive Orpheus of damage. This deck with counterblast is just the most deadly deck that you can run up against because of this restanding big unit and because of the amount of power that HEXAORB can give. A lot of people don't understand how HEXAORB works. HEXAORB can give power to her booster. So any trigger you check with HEXAORB is 20k power to your Vanguard. You can give the crit. You can get like crit if you drive check a crit. You can give the crit to your Vanguard. You can literally just give all power booster. Anything that affects a booster's power during it while it's boosting, that adds on to the power of the Vanguard.
Right.
So if you check a crit, you can crit Vanguard power booster, and then give her extra 10k to the booster. That's 20k instead of 10k. A lot of people don't understand that. And so a lot of these situations where they think it's a no pass isn't a no pass. Then you get another trigger, that's another 40k to your Vanguard. That's 40k on attack. That can almost get through an over trigger defensively if they put it in the Guardian Circle. But yeah, I pretty much got through most of the scenarios of the deck. Play style, you want to always know what's coming next. You want to always be trying to get your HEXAORBs. That's why I run so much of the draw power and the checking power, because you want to be able to get your HEXAORB as quick as possible. You can win without HEXAORB Persona Riding, but you want to Persona Ride as much as possible. If you don't have the Persona Ride, you 100% have to have the check top cards because you want to start setting up.
Right,
if you have the Persona Ride, they're not as important. But I do think one of the most underrated card that I can think of in the deck, outside of the counter charger, is
this or Reflute.
Well, technically you could say these.
I was saying Reflute.
Reflute is a really, really good card. This gets me my HEXAORBs, which is the most powerful play you can have in the deck. So I do lean towards this card, this Counterblast 2, Draw 2, because it gets through your deck and gets your HEXAORBs. But after that, Reflute is the MVP simply off of the Soul Charge, which is really strong with HEXAORB, and giving a unit 10k that's going to restand bigger attacks. So that's pretty much the standard of the deck. As far as the triggers go, my last point with the triggers, you don't need a lot of crits. You can actually run 4 crits. Once you see a crit, that's a crit every time you Persona Ride HEXAORB. Every HEXAORB you have is a crit trigger once you have a crit in your hand. So you actually don't need to see other crits because you're going to guarantee a crit with the HEXAORB. The reason why I run fronts, and a lot of people don't run fronts, but they don't think of this scenario. If your opponent is at 5 damage, that crit does nothing for you. If your opponent is at 5 damage, you get a front trigger. That's 10k to your front row and an extra 10k because you check the trigger.
So it's like 20k to 1 unit.
It's 20k to 1 unit and 10k to the rest of the units. Versus you get a crit and then you give 10k. Front trigger is an entirely separate scenario because of an extra set of 10Ks. If you have a front row, that's 2 extra 10Ks that you're getting out.
Gotcha.
And so your opponent's at 5 damage, you want to put a front on top with HEXAORB. If your opponent is at 3 damage, obviously, or 4 damage, you want to put a crit on top. But once they get to 5, magic number, front triggers are the way to go. I run 3 because I want to see it. I don't really care about hitting them early game. I just run the 3 because you want to get to it eventually. We'll get more draw cards, more filtering cards. You can cut it down to 2. And run whatever other trigger you want to run, whether it be another draw trigger or if you want to just try to cheese and run extra crits. But the crits are definitely not necessary. But that's pretty much my the entire build and how things run. Everything else is playtesting. This deck is not super easy to play. You do need to know matchups, but I do think that this deck is the best deck based on what it can do. The next contender, the other deck, the 1A, the 1B, whichever order you want to put it in, is Bastion, I think. And then after that, it's Bruce, and you go down the line.
All right, man. I would definitely say I've had a ton of fun testing this deck and even play testing against you. Like some of those scenarios that you mentioned earlier definitely did come up. I think when we played, I did not give you any damage until like I literally got into my turn 3.
Yeah.
And that's why I was able to actually push for advantage at that point in time. But like I said, this matchup, you definitely have to know the matchup. It's
You have to know the matchup.
It's a sleeper deck. Like, nobody, again, you just don't see it coming. But again, I ain't gonna hold you guys up. If you all like what y'all see here, thank you so much. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what next deck you want to see on the channel. If you want to see some match VODs with this deck, hey, we can get it for you. Again, thank you, man. Congrats on the first place finish. All right, guys, this is Crow signing out. Peace.